Good evening, everyone. Let's have an honest conversation, not just about kindness, but about the heavy toll we pay when kindness turns into self-neglect. You see, there's a difference between being kind and being too nice. Kindness comes from courage and integrity. Being too nice often comes from fear of disappointing, fear of rejection, fear of conflict. But here's the thing about fear: if we let it run the show, it becomes a thief. It steals our authenticity, our boundaries, and our sense of worth. And in 2025, the world doesn't need more niceness, it needs more authenticity, more boundaries, and more courage. Let's start with this truth: boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about creating space for the right kind of connection, the kind that respects who you are and honors what you need. Yet so many of us struggle with boundaries because we've been conditioned to think they are barriers, that they're selfish, or worse, that they'll make people walk away. But let me tell you something: without boundaries, there is no real relationship. There's only a one-sided dynamic where someone's needs are being prioritized and the others are being ignored. When you say yes to things that drain you, you're not being kind, you're being self-sacrificing. And here's the hard truth: when you constantly self-sacrifice, you send a silent message to others that your needs don't matter. Let me put it this way: think of your life as a home. Boundaries are the walls that protect your space, the doors that allow in what nurtures you, and the locks that keep out what harms you. Without walls, you don't have a home, you have chaos. Anyone can come in, stay as long as they want, and rearrange your furniture without your permission. That's what life feels like when you live without boundaries. And let's not confuse boundaries with hostility. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about inviting people in, but only in a way that feels safe and sustainable for you. They're an act of love, not just for others, but for yourself. Here's the thing: boundaries do more than protect you. They also teach others how to treat you. Every time you set a boundary, you communicate: this is how I need to be loved. This is what respect looks like to me. And isn't that what we all want? To be loved and respected for who we truly are, not for how much we're willing to give up or how far we're willing to bend. I know what you're thinking, but what if setting boundaries upsets people? Yes, it will. Boundaries will upset the people who benefit from you having none. And that's okay. Because the goal of life isn't to avoid upsetting people, it's to live in alignment with your values, your truth, and your peace. Think about the relationships in your life right now. Are they built on mutual respect and understanding, or are they built on one person giving and the other person taking? Are you saying yes out of obligation, guilt, or fear of losing someone? Or are you saying yes because it feels good and right for your soul? Boundaries give you the freedom to choose your yes and your no, and when you get to choose, your relationships stop being about duty and start being about joy. Here's the challenge in 2025. I want you to stop apologizing for setting boundaries. Stop feeling guilty for protecting your energy. Start seeing boundaries as an act of radical self-respect. And trust me, the people who truly love you, the ones who are meant to be in your life, will honor those boundaries. So let's rewrite the story. Boundaries are not selfish, they're self-preservation. Boundaries are not walls, they're bridges to deeper, more meaningful relationships. And most importantly, boundaries are not optional, they're essential. If you want to build relationships that stand the test of time, you must start with a strong foundation. And that foundation is boundaries. Without them, love becomes a transaction, respect becomes one-sided, and connection becomes a burden. In 2025, let's stop sacrificing ourselves to maintain relationships. Instead, let's embrace boundaries as the framework that makes real relationships possible. It's not just about protecting your peace, it's about creating a space where love, respect, and authenticity can thrive. Let's talk about people-pleasing. It's a term we hear a lot, but let's be clear about what it really means. People-pleasing is not kindness, and it's certainly not love. It's a behavior born out of fear, the fear of disappointing, the fear of rejection, and sometimes the fear of being alone. And while it may look like generosity on the surface, at its core, people-pleasing is a performance, not an act of genuine connection. When you say yes to someone because you're afraid of saying no, you're not giving them your love, you're giving them your compliance. And compliance is not a foundation for healthy relationships. True love doesn't require you to shrink yourself, overextend yourself, or lose yourself in the process of making others happy. Here's the danger of people pleasing. It creates a relationship dynamic where you're always giving, but not from a place of abundance or joy. Instead, you give because you feel like you have to like it's the only way to be valued or accepted. Over time, this erodes your sense of self-worth. You begin to believe that your value lies solely in what you can do for others, rather than in who you are. And let's be honest, people-pleasing isn't sustainable. The more you give out of obligation, the more you deplete yourself. And when you're running on empty, resentment starts to creep in. Resentment toward the people you're trying to please, but even more so, resentment toward yourself for not having the courage to set boundaries and speak your truth. Now, I want you to consider this when you're constantly bending over backward to please others. Are you truly being honest with them, or are you just telling them what they want to hear? Real love, real connection is built on honesty, not on appeasement. Let me share a truth that might be hard to hear when you're in the habit of people-pleasing. You're not giving others the opportunity to love the real you. They're loving the version of you that's always agreeable, always accommodating, always saying yes. And if they've only ever known that version of you, can they truly say they love you? In 2025, we must redefine what it means to care for others. Love is not about making yourself small to make someone else comfortable. It's not about carrying someone else's emotional load at the expense of your own well-being. Love is about showing up authentically, even when it's hard, and trusting that the people who matter will value the real you, not just the nice you. And here's something we don't talk about enough. People-pleasing can be a form of manipulation. I know that sounds harsh, but think about it. When you're overly nice or overly accommodating, are you doing it purely out of love, or are you hoping to gain something in return, like approval, validation, or acceptance? True love doesn't come with strings attached, and neither should kindness. So how do we break free from the cycle of people-pleasing? It starts with understanding that your worth is not tied to how much you can do for others. Your worth is inherent, unshakable, and non-negotiable. It doesn't increase when someone compliments you, and it doesn't decrease when someone criticizes you. Next, we need to practice the courage to disappoint people. Yes, I said courage to disappoint people. Because when you stop pleasing everyone, you will disappoint some of them. But here's the thing, the people who truly love you will survive the disappointment. And the ones who can't handle it, they were only there for what you could give, not for who you truly are. Let's also remember that saying no is not an act of rejection, it's an act of self-respect. Every time you say no to something that doesn't align with your values or your capacity, you're saying yes to yourself. And when you say yes to yourself, you create the space to show up fully and authentically for the people who matter most. In 2025, let's make a commitment to stop confusing people-pleasing with love. Love is not about sacrificing your needs to meet someone else's. Love is about showing up as your whole, authentic self and allowing others to do the same. It's about building relationships where both people can thrive, not just one. Let's be real about something that doesn't get talked about often enough. Over-niceness isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's a mask, a way to avoid the hard conversations, the uncomfortable truths, and the boundaries that challenge us. Over-niceness can become a shield we hide behind, not to connect with others, but to avoid conflict, rejection, or even our own emotions. Think about this. How many times have you said yes to something you didn't want to do because saying no felt too awkward or uncomfortable? How many times have you smiled through situations that hurt you or offended you just to keep the peace? Over-niceness is often less about being kind and more about avoiding discomfort. But here's the thing, avoidance doesn't solve problems, it buries them. And buried problems don't go away, they grow roots. They show up in our relationships as resentment, in our mental health as anxiety, and in our self-worth as doubt. Over-niceness can also be a way of avoiding authenticity. When we're overly nice, we're often presenting a version of ourselves that we think others want to see, rather than the version that's real. It's a form of self-betrayal. And the longer we wear the mask, the harder it becomes to take it off. Now let's talk about what over-niceness avoids most of all: conflict. Conflict scares many of us because we equate it with broken relationships, hurt feelings, or rejection. But avoiding conflict doesn't preserve relationships, it weakens them. True relationships are not built on endless agreement or surface-level politeness, they're built on trust and honesty. When you avoid conflict by being overly nice, you're not actually keeping the peace, you're just postponing the storm. And here's the irony: the longer you avoid it, the bigger the storm becomes. Small issues that could have been resolved with a simple conversation turn into deep misunderstandings. And eventually the relationship suffers not because of the conflict itself, but because of the avoidance. Over-niceness also stops us from setting boundaries, and without boundaries, relationships lose their balance. When you're constantly saying yes to avoid saying no, you're creating a dynamic where your needs are invisible. And when your needs are invisible, so is your true self. Let's not forget that over-niceness can also lead to exploitation. When you consistently put others' needs above your own, you teach them that your time, energy, and emotional labor are always available. You become the person people turn to not because they respect you, but because they know you won't say no. But why do we fall into the trap of over-niceness? Often it's rooted in fear: the fear of being disliked, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of confrontation, and sometimes the fear of our own emotions, anger, sadness, or frustration that we'd rather suppress than express. So how do we break free from this cycle? First, we have to recognize that avoidance is not a strategy, it's a trap. It might feel easier in the moment, but it always costs more in the long run. Next, we need to get comfortable with discomfort. Growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. It happens in the moments when we choose to have the hard conversation, set the boundary, or show up as our authentic selves, even when it feels risky. We also need to redefine what kindness really means. Kindness is not about always saying yes. Kindness is not about ignoring your own needs to accommodate someone else's. True kindness is rooted in respect for yourself and for others. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to say no, to be honest about your limits, or to challenge someone with love and compassion. In 2025, let's make a commitment to take off the mask of over-niceness. Let's stop using it as a way to avoid the things that scare us. Instead, let's step into authenticity, even when it's hard. Because here's the truth: being real might not make you the most agreeable person in the room, but it will make you the most trustworthy. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want? To be seen, respected, and valued, not for the mask we wear, but for the person we truly are. So let's stop avoiding the uncomfortable. Let's stop hiding behind over-niceness. And let's start living with courage, authenticity, and a commitment to show up as our full selves. Let's take a moment to reflect on something we all crave at some point in our lives: approval. Whether it's from our family, our friends, our colleagues, or even strangers, the need to be approved of can feel almost like a survival instinct. But here's the truth: many of us struggle to accept your value has nothing to do with who approves of you, how many people validate you, or whether the world applauds your choices. When we tie our value to approval, we set ourselves up for an endless chase, running after something that is fleeting and often conditional. Approval is unstable. It depends on someone else's mood, perspective, or expectations. And as long as your sense of worth depends on external validation, you're giving away your power. You're saying, I'll only feel good about myself if you say I'm good enough. The danger of this mindset is that it creates a cycle of dependence. You start making choices not because they're true to who you are, but because you believe they'll earn you the approval you think you need. You overextend yourself, say yes when you want to say no, and put others' opinions above your own values. Slowly, you lose touch with what you really want and who you really are, all for the sake of gaining approval that may never truly satisfy you. Let's not confuse approval with connection. Approval is surface level. It's often about meeting someone else's standards or expectations. Connection, on the other hand, is about being seen and accepted as your authentic self. The two are not the same. When you prioritize approval over authenticity, you might gain the applause of others, but you'll lose the deeper, more meaningful experience of being truly known and understood. Tying your value to approval can also make you a prisoner of perfectionism. You start believing that you must be flawless to be worthy of love and respect. You overanalyze every word, every action, every decision, trying to measure up to some imagined standard of perfection. But perfection is an illusion, it's unattainable. And the more you chase it, the more you exhaust yourself trying to be something no one can ever truly be. We often seek approval because we want to feel seen, heard, and valued. But here's the paradox. The more you look for those things in others, the more invisible you become to yourself. You forget to listen to your own voice, honor your own needs, and validate your own worth. You hand over the keys to your self-esteem to people who might not even know how to value you properly. Approval seeking also keeps you from taking risks or embracing opportunities that align with your purpose. When your focus is on being liked, you avoid anything that might make you stand out or face criticism. You stay in your comfort zone, even when it's stifling, because stepping out might mean losing someone's approval. But staying small to be liked isn't living, it's merely existing. It's important to recognize how deeply ingrained this habit of approval seeking can be. For many of us, it starts in childhood when we learn to associate approval with love or acceptance. We carry that belief into adulthood, unconsciously believing that if we can just please everyone around us, we'll finally be enough. But the truth is, you've been enough all along. Your value is not something anyone can give you, it's something you already possess. When you look to others for approval, you give them control over your emotions. If they praise you, you feel good. If they criticize or ignore you, you feel worthless. But life is too precious to let your sense of self be dictated by people who may not even see your full potential or value. Relying on approval can also distort your relationships. When you constantly seek validation, you attract people who thrive on your neediness, rather than those who appreciate your independence and strength. It becomes a one-sided dynamic where you give and give, hoping for scraps of validation in return. But relationships built on approval seeking are inherently unbalanced, and over time, they can drain you emotionally and spiritually. To break free from the trap of seeking approval, you have to start by recognizing your inherent value. This is not about arrogance or self-centeredness. It's about knowing deep in your core that you are worthy just as you are. Your worth is not determined by your achievements, your appearance, or how well you fit into someone else's mold. It's intrinsic, unchanging, and absolute. When you understand that your value is independent of anyone else's opinion, you'll stop bending over backward to gain approval. You'll start making choices that align with your own values and desires rather than trying to meet the expectations of others. You'll find freedom in knowing that you don't have to prove yourself to anyone because you're already enough. This shift is not easy. It requires unlearning years, even decades of conditioning. It means facing the discomfort of disappointing people or not meeting their expectations. It means learning to validate yourself even when others don't. But the freedom and self-respect that come from breaking free from approval seeking are worth every ounce of effort it takes. Kindness is often seen as soft, gentle, and unassuming a quality that avoids conflict and seeks harmony at all costs. But true kindness is far from passive. True kindness takes courage. It's not just about being agreeable or polite, it's about standing in your truth, even when it's difficult. Courage is what transforms kindness into a powerful force for good kindness that is active, intentional, and rooted in integrity. Courageous kindness starts with being honest. It's about speaking the truth in love, even when it might upset someone. Think about it. How many times have you avoided telling someone what they really needed to hear because you didn't want to rock the boat? Real kindness doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. It means approaching them with empathy and care. It takes courage to be honest when dishonesty would be easier, but honesty wrapped in kindness is one of the greatest gifts you can give someone. Courageous kindness also requires setting boundaries. Many people mistakenly believe that being kind means saying yes to everything and everyone, but without boundaries, kindness can quickly turn into self-sacrifice or burnout. Courageous kindness recognizes that you can't pour from an empty cup. It takes strength to say no when your instinct is to please, but saying no can often be the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others. When you protect your time, energy, and emotional well-being, you show others how to value and respect you, and you model what healthy kindness looks like. Another element of courageous kindness is standing up for what is right. In a world where it's often easier to look the other way, it takes bravery to intervene when someone is being mistreated or marginalized. Acts of kindness that require courage, whether it's defending someone who can't defend themselves, speaking up against injustice, or simply being the voice of reason in a heated situation, are what create real change. These moments test your character, and your willingness to act with kindness in the face of adversity shows the depth of your courage. Courageous kindness is also about being vulnerable. It's about allowing others to see you as you truly are, flaws, insecurities, and all. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength. It takes immense courage to open yourself up to others, knowing that there's a risk of rejection or misunderstanding. But in doing so, you create space for authentic connection. And what is kindness if not the bridge that connects us to one another? When you show up with vulnerability, your kindness becomes an invitation for others to do the same, creating relationships that are built on trust and mutual respect. It's important to understand that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means taking action in spite of fear. Sometimes being kind in the way that matters most is terrifying. It's terrifying to tell someone no because you worry about how they'll react. It's terrifying to stand up to a bully or speak out against injustice because you fear the consequences. It's terrifying to be vulnerable because you fear being judged or rejected. But courage is what allows you to move through that fear, to act in alignment with your values, and to live with integrity. Courageous kindness also means extending grace not just to others, but to yourself. So often we are our own harshest critics, holding ourselves to impossible standards and berating ourselves when we fall short. Kindness without courage might look like brushing off your mistakes and pretending they don't matter. But courageous kindness acknowledges your imperfections while choosing to offer yourself the same compassion you would offer a friend. It's about recognizing that growth comes from struggle and being gentle with yourself through the process. Lastly, courageous kindness understands that sometimes being kind requires stepping back. There are moments when the kindest thing you can do is to let someone face the consequences of their actions rather than shielding them from discomfort. It takes courage to let go, to trust that others are capable of learning and growing on their own. This kind of kindness doesn't coddle or enable, it empowers. It says, I believe in your ability to rise to the challenge. And believing in someone's strength is one of the most courageous acts of kindness you can offer. In a world that often equates kindness with weakness, it's time to redefine what it truly means to be kind. Kindness is not about sacrificing yourself for others or avoiding discomfort for approval. It's about setting boundaries, being honest, and valuing your own worth as much as you value others. It takes courage to be kind in ways that honor your authenticity and integrity, but this is where true connection and growth are born.